Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Welcome once again to the Compass Points podcast, brought to you by the fine folks at CompassKnox.com. Those fine folks being me, Jesse Mayshark, and my friend and colleague, Scott Barker. How are you doing, Scott?
Doing great, Jesse. I don't know that I'm doing as well as you are. Since you are reporting from an undisclosed so far location, you mind sharing with people who you are? I'll
go ahead and disclose it. I am sitting in a park in beautiful Santa Fe, New Mexico, on a little vacation out here for the wedding of an old friend. So I apologize on the front end for any technical glitches that may arise. We're probably pushing this technology to its limits, but we still wanted to go ahead and get a podcast done if we could.
Oh, great. It's good to hear from the Santa Fe Bureau of Compass.
That's right.
Well, we had quite a bit going on this week. One of the themes seems to have been reorganization, or at least organization. And the first up was from the Knoxville Police Department. The administration proposed a change for the deputy chiefs in anticipation of the arrival of new police chief Paul Noel, who will take command of the department on Monday. What they did was, up until now, deputy chiefs had been covered under civil service rules. That meant a couple of things. One was that they had to be filled from within, be promoted into that job, and also they had certain protections as far as disciplinary process, things like that. So the administration asked that status be removed. And on Wednesday, the Civil Service Merit Board granted that request on a 2-1 vote. It was close, but the idea is to give Chief Noel, as he comes into office, more flexibility to name his top commanders. And the deputy chiefs are the top commanders. There are 3 positions that are deputy chief positions. 2 of them are vacant right now. One of them is occupied by Deputy Chief Cindy Gass, who is retiring in the next few months. So Noel will fill all 3 of those very soon, and the administration, and I'm assuming Chief Noel, he watched the proceedings by Zoom but didn't participate, but assumed that he's going to be coming in and evaluating KPD people, maybe looking at people from other departments, we don't know yet, to fill those positions. So
yeah, and this is an interesting move, and I mean, of course, it brings KPD in line with pretty much all other, or almost all other, city departments, where once you move out of sort of the general ranks into management, which a deputy chief position certainly is a management position at the city's largest department, you lose civil service protection.
Yeah, that is the case in the other 12 departments. There are 13 in the city. That's the case in the other 12. This does bring KPD in line with them. The rank and file was a little divided on it. One of the things that I think came up that seemed to have bothered them about it wasn't so much the idea of the change, but that they didn't know about it. They were only they only found out about it when the agenda for the Civil Service Merit Board meeting came out a week before the meeting. So there wasn't a lot of time for them to absorb that and to see the possible upsides, downsides, whatever. There were several concerns about how that might affect people in KPD. The idea that some highly qualified commanders would not want to move up and sacrifice their civil service protections to take a position that they would normally have been able to, or normally would have applied for. There's also the idea that that Chief Noel or chief down the road, any police chief would reach down and pluck up a sergeant or a lieutenant and promote them over higher ranking and more experienced commanders. So there were some concerns. I think that by and large, however, the officers, the ones who spoke at the meeting, the ones I've talked to outside of the meeting, by and large said whatever that decision ended up being, and they would support the chief, and their goal was to move the department forward and improve law enforcement over the long haul. So I think that now that decision's been made, they'll put that behind them, and on Monday, Chief Noel takes over, and we'll see how that works going forward. And the school system.
Well, I was going to say Chief Noel will probably move pretty quickly to try to fill those vacant positions because he's going to need help managing this department. I mean, he's coming in brand new to a department he doesn't know. I guess obviously this gives him the flexibility to bring in people from outside the department, but it's hard to believe that he won't look hard, at least at some people in the department, just to have some people who can, be sort of like his trusted guides to that territory.
I'm sure that he will give the current high-ranking commanders at KPD a good evaluation, a good look to see if they would be willing to take on the deputy chief job. I think that would probably be his preference, at least early on, because he doesn't know the lay of the land yet. So he's going to have to, and he's admitted that he's going to have to learn the department, learn the people in it, their strengths, their weaknesses, and everything else. And that's going to be pretty much job one when he takes over on Monday.
Right. And so as you were just about to say, that the school system also announced some administrative changes this week as new superintendent John Ryswick took over in a similar but different position from Chief Noel, because obviously Ryswick is coming from within the school system, knows it very well, and presumably he's had plenty of time to think about how he would do things if he were in charge. Mm-hmm. And so now he is in charge. And the first thing he did this past week was pretty quickly announce a administrative reorganization. He's going to move to have 5 assistant superintendents over various aspects of the school system, and he's also going to organize the school system itself into 5 regions, kind of organized around the feeder patterns, so that students who go to, an elementary school and then up to a middle school and then up to a high school, all of those schools would be in the same region. And then district level supervision of those schools would be organized by regions, with the idea being that, different regions of the county have somewhat different pressing needs and priorities. And then he followed up that announcement a few days later by naming 4 of those 5 assistant superintendents. And it's an interesting group. I think one question about Ryswick coming in was that he is a guy from within the system. He was sort of the insider candidate. How much change was he really going to make? And I think these appointments show that he really does want to make some changes. All 4 of the people who he named are either being promoted into new positions from within or are coming from outside the school system into new positions. So he didn't leave anybody in just like an existing position as an assistant superintendent. Two of the people who he named, Keith Wilson as assistant superintendent of academics and Jason Myers as assistant superintendent of student success, are currently within the system and moved up into those roles. The other two, Garfield Adams as assistant superintendent of operations and Liz Norton as assistant superintendent of strategy, are coming from outside the system, but both of them have extensive experience in Knox County schools. Both of them had worked in Knox County schools as teachers and administrators. And then Garfield Adams had left to be executive principal of Oak Ridge High School, where they've hired him back from. Liz Norton's been working for the State Department of Education. So it's not really that he's exactly bringing in outsiders, because all of the people he's naming to these posts do have background in the system. The other thing I think is interesting is that all of them are relatively young, and Ryswick himself is relatively young. He's 48, a generation younger than recently retired Superintendent Bob Thomas. And so I think we do have kind of a new cast of faces and characters really at the very top levels of the school system. Be very interesting to see how all that works out. One thing that I thought was notable was that Russ Oaks, who has been chief operating officer for the school system, both under Bob Thomas and previous to that under former Superintendent Jim McIntyre, his name was not on the organizational chart. I reached out to Russ to see if, he had a retirement announcement or anything to make. We haven't heard back as of Friday when we're taping this. But I think his absence, it's safe to assume that he's not going to be part of the administration going forward. He's certainly at an age and level of experience where he can retire. But I also think that by itself sends a signal that, Ryswick really wants to have his own people in place. Russ Oaks had been a senior administrator under the three previous superintendents, and him not being part of this administration means that Ryswick really is going to have his own cast of people in place, which, that's something that we see often, right, when there's a turnover in administration.
Yeah, I had one question that I had and that you can answer, I know, is that and this goes back to the new structure of the administration in the schools. Previously, it went kind of sideways. All the elementary schools, then all of the middle schools, and all of the high schools were kind of managed separately, or at least each of them were managed, under one umbrella. And this is going to take all three. This is going to be more vertical, more of a silo thing than expressed geographically. Is there concern about that might exacerbate some of the disparities? For example, with the inner city schools inside the city of Knoxville tend to have lower graduation rates and some lower performing schools there compared to schools in West Knoxville or North Knox County, or West Knox County and North Knox County.
Yeah, I think that it'll be interesting to see how that regional breakdown works. I think one thing to keep in mind, because I've seen some discussion of this online, is that none of this has to do with school funding, so organizing the schools, managing them regionally does not affect the levels of funding that they all get. For example, you mentioned a lot of the urban schools have some additional socioeconomic challenges. They currently receive the most funding per pupil of any schools in the county, and nothing about this new regional setup is going to change that, because a lot of that is set by state formulas, it's set by federal funding formulas that drive all of that. So I think the idea is that you will have students enter into an elementary school in South Knoxville. All the elementary schools in South Knoxville feed into South Doyle Middle School. All of the students from South Doyle Middle School feed into South Doyle High School. And so, that there is a certain logic to having all of those, that vertical organization under one administrative body, essentially, a couple of regional supervisors, because all of those schools, all of those students share some characteristics, certain needs, whether those are sort of the socioeconomic needs or the infrastructure needs of the schools themselves. So I think that's the logic of it, and it'll just be interesting to see how that shakes out. One thing to note is that 4 of those regions are going to be then ultimately under the supervision of the new Assistant Superintendent of Academics, Keith Wilson. The 5th region is going to be under Jason Myers, who is the Assistant Superintendent for Student Success, and his other areas of concentration include special education, English language learners, a lot of the sort of special needs populations of the school system. They haven't yet defined which schools are in which regions, but I think it's pretty safe to guess that 5th region that Jason Myers is going to be supervising will probably include those higher needs, more urban schools where you have much higher concentrations of special education students, English language learners, the students who he has already served with supervising. So again, there's a logic there. On the other hand, does that mean that, those 4 regions all reporting to the one assistant superintendent and the 5th region reporting to the other one, does that mean that 5th region gets special attention? Does it mean it ends up seeming sort of segregated in some way? I think that those are things that we're just going to have to watch play out.
All right. Well, great. Pivoting real quickly to a more of a business story. Earlier this week, the Big Ears Festival announced their calculations on the economic impact that the International Arts and Music Festival has on Knoxville and Knox County. They hired a firm out of Austin, Texas, to come in and do an analysis. They came up with the number $36.1 million of economic input, and that also generated another $2.6 million in state and local taxes. Of course, Ashley Capps, the founder of Big Ears, said, primarily they're, concerned about putting on a good festival, but it's also good that they put up these numbers, and there's a symbiotic relationship, a really close relationship between the city of Knoxville, Knox County, and Big Ears, and that Knoxville helps Big Ears helps Knoxville, and everybody's good on that. And I think one thing that we need to disclose at the moment is Jesse's wife works for Big Ears, and when we cover Big Ears, I do all that coverage, and Jesse does not have anything to do with it. So anyway, that was covered.
That's right. And I will refrain. I have many things I could say about Big Ears because I've been a fan of Big Ears for a long time, and I've been going to it since before I even met my wife. But in the interest of journalistic propriety, I will just not say a word.
Well, that's good, Jesse. I'll try to do the same if I ever get involved in something like that too. The last thing we're going to talk about in review is a topic called use on review. Jesse, introduce this to our listeners, and so they can get in the weeds with us on zoning matters.
Yeah, this is one of those things that we local government reporters sort of hate to try to write about because it is important and it has some significant potential ramifications, but it's also technical and kind of boring. Most people, when you start talking about zoning appeals, their eyes glaze over, and I understand that. So the short version of this is that there are certain kinds of land use that are only allowed on review under our zoning codes. And this is specifically talking about Knox County outside the city of Knoxville, because the city of Knoxville has its own procedures, and we're just going to leave them completely out of this discussion. So this is in the and also Farragut, which has fairly strict land use regulations. We're talking about the unincorporated parts of Knox County outside Knoxville and Farragut. And basically, in any zone that you're in, a residential zone, commercial zone, whatever it is, there are certain uses that you are automatically allowed by right, uses by right they're called. And then there's other kinds of uses that are allowed, but only on review, which means that you can make a proposal for those uses. The Planning Commission has to assess those and decide whether or not they think it's appropriate in that spot. If somebody doesn't like a decision that the Planning Commission makes currently, they can appeal that decision to the county's Board of Zoning Appeals. After the Board of Zoning Appeals hears it, and if somebody's still unhappy with that decision, it can be further appealed through Chancery Court, which then you're getting into essentially a legal lawsuit type situation. There's a proposal pushed by County Mayor Glenn Jacobs, and that County Commission last month asked the Planning Commission to look at and make a recommendation on, which would basically eliminate that middle step, and any use on review appeal, instead of going to the Board of Zoning Appeals, which is a pretty straightforward process. You pay $200, you get put on the next month's agenda, you go in, you make your case, and they make a decision. It would remove that as an option, and you would have to go directly to Chancery Court, which is mostly a more difficult, often more expensive and much lengthier process than just going to the Board of Zoning Appeals. So County Mayor Jacobs has made the argument that this is necessary because these appeals to the Board of Zoning Appeals, which are most often filed by citizen groups or neighbors who are unhappy about some proposed development, can slow down development. And Jacobs' case is that, look, we're in a housing crisis. We need to approve as many housing projects and proposals as possible. And so we need to do something that makes it faster and removes this possible bureaucratic impediment. Groups like the Knox County Planning Alliance, who represent community, neighborhood organizations, basically say, no, we need this this step as sort of a check from the community to make sure that developments that are proposed and approved, don't overly disrupt existing communities. So that's the background. This week it went to Planning Commission for their consideration. And Scott, you were there. It was a long meeting. What did they do?
It was a long meeting, and what they did was the Knox County Law Department came in and basically gave them a roadmap to compromise on this, that they didn't have to take the extreme step of just yanking the appeals process out of the Board of Zoning Appeals, and what would without getting into too much of the minutia, a lot of these appeals were not really appeals of uses on review. They were appeals of subdivision design plans, and that isn't in the
done under the plan development ordinance of
yes.
the zoning code.
Yes, the plan development zoning of the code. Plan development is the most frequently used zoning request of developers of residential areas. So what has happened over the years, according to Senior Deputy Law Director Mike Moyers, is that people have started appealing those development plans to BZA, and BZA doesn't have the legal authority to consider them. So the thing is to go back and Planning Commission voted to do this, is to recommend that County Commission go in and if they have to reword the ordinance, do that, but make it explicitly clear that development plans don't get appealed to BZA, uses on review do, and that should accomplish what Mayor Jacobs has proposed without taking an extreme step. And I think that the law department is going to be drafting that, and then it goes back into County Commission's court next time they meet, and they will be presented with an ordinance that would accomplish that.
And the Knox County Planning Alliance, maybe not thrilled about this, but they felt like it was a better step than completely getting away from appealing uses on review to the BZA.
Yeah, they're glad that there was a compromise reached. They're glad that BZA retains its authority on uses on review appeals. One of the things that they keep wanting to emphasize is that the county is currently going through a planning overhaul, essentially, called Advance Knox. It's a long process, a lot of public input. They think that any major changes can and should be addressed through that process, and they're hoping that through this process, in particular the planned development zone ordinance, the one that was that kind of prompted Jacobs to do this, is addressed and cleared up and clarified, and so that would be the long-term solution to this perceived problem.
All right. Well, and another thing you wrote about this week, Scott, was an update on a major investment the city of Knoxville made a few years ago, or committed to a few years ago, in public art. And it is also the topic of our interview segment this week. So why don't you go ahead and set us up for that?
A couple of years ago, the Public Arts Committee commissioned a $500,000 sculpture from an artist named Mark Fornes in Brooklyn. His stuff is shown worldwide. We've reported on that before. We reported on an update that they're getting ready to move forward with it, and sometime the city hopes by the end of the year that will be an addition to the cultural landscape at Cradle of Country Music Park. And so we talked to Liza Zenni, who is the executive director of the Arts and Culture Alliance, and she acts as the liaison for the Public Arts Committee, which commissioned the sculpture. And she's a very passionate advocate for the arts, and we'll go straight to our interview with her.
All right. And as those of us who have known Liza for a while know, she's not shy about speaking her mind. So this was an interesting conversation.
This week's guest is Liza Zenni. She is the executive director for the Arts and Culture Alliance, and we are going to talk about public art. Welcome,
Yeehaw!
Liza.
Yeehaw! Thank you.
Great. Earlier last week, we wrote an update about a long-awaited major public art project for Cradle of Country Music Park. It's a sculpture by an artist named Mark Fornes, who is headquartered in Brooklyn, and his art is found around the world, and wanted to get a podcast version of the update from you. Where do we stand on that project?
The thing I love about public art, and there are lots of things I love, is that it's public. And this process, the process of selection for this piece, was very public. Hundreds of voices were heard. People were invited to participate, to give their input, to come up with plans for the park. We have 6 or 7 plans they came up with. And then the Public Art Committee, which is all volunteer, moved forward with those plans. And so public art has the fingerprints of many people on it. But the key is that those people have to have shown up. They have to have participated in all the public opportunities there were to be heard. And so that's something that I really love, is that it's public. It was selected by the public. It had input by the public. And once it is installed, it belongs to the public. The other thing about public art is it's site specific. These pieces, like anybody will identify and can identify a Picasso, but not every Picasso is the same. This artist, Mark Fornes, and the very many, he does have a signature look, but his piece for Knoxville resonates for Knoxville. It is a site-specific piece. It was created for Knoxville. It has aspects that will only be meaningful for Knoxville. The other thing I love about it is that this corner has long been kind of overlooked for the public use. Now, the canine use is through the roof, but the public use by humans has really kind of been ignored. 14,000 cars go by there at least every day. And so we're really delighted to turn that over to kind of convert a lot of the ground cover into grass so that people can use it. It can be a gathering place, it can be a performing space, and it can be an iconic, become an iconic symbol for Knoxville.
And I think we should just jump in for anyone not familiar with the Cradle of Country Music Park, or if that name doesn't ring a bell. We're talking about sort of the triangular-ish pocket park on the corner of Gay Street and Summit Hill Drive there.
Yep.
So what is the status of this? Full disclosure, this process, you talk about being a long and involved public process. I was still working for the city when this was initiated back in the latter part of former Mayor Madeline Rojero's tenure. And I think the selection happened in, was it 2018, 2019?
Well, in December of 2013, the Public Art Committee met and created kind of an outline of what would be the priority spaces in the city. Spaces in the city that we said cried out for public art. And we identified that spot, the Cradle of Country Music Park, as being the one space that cried out the loudest for public art. And that was December 2013. The 5 artists, we had 129 artists respond from around the world. The 5 that we selected to give, proposals, they came to Knoxville in 2018. And through a public presentation at the Knoxville Museum of Art Auditorium on July 18th of 2018, all of those 5 proposals were seen and it was selected. The piece was selected. So yes, it's been going on for quite some time. It's got the fingerprints of many people. It's gone before city council many times. Many of the people who participated in this program in selecting it were people of color. Actually, I think Knoxville's Public Art Committee is remarkable in that 50% of the people who have devoted their volunteer time to public art are people of color who live in the city of Knoxville. And that's the beauty of it, I think also too, is that we had a wonderfully diverse set of voices moving forward that ultimately chose this piece.
And when will we get to see it? When is it going to show up?
Well, for the firm answer on that, you'd have to talk to David Brace. He has promised to me and Scott Barker, my pal, down there in the little square right below me, that they will break ground in the fall and we should have a piece that the main components by December of 2022. It's 2022. I can't believe it.
Just to clarify, David Brace is the deputy to the mayor, chief operating officer for the city, and he's kind of the point man for city government on this project. When this is installed, what are your hopes for it? What is the don't say it's art for art's sake.
No, because it is not.
But what do you hope that these benefits to the city beyond aesthetics?
Well, we had in those very, very early stages of input, we heard from people exactly what they wanted there, and that informed what we were looking for. First of all, we heard that they wanted something that would connect the Market Square area and pull people from there down to the old city. They wanted to pull people from the 300 block through the 200 block to the 100 block. So they really wanted something that had a sense of movement to it. We also heard from city residents that said they wanted to use that park. They wanted to be there so that they could sit in some shade and read and enjoy the public art, the art piece. They wanted something 360 degrees that they could be under and look around and enjoy. So a contemplative space. And the third thing that they wanted was the opposite, of course, because we're Knoxvillians. They wanted a gathering space. They wanted a space where people could come, where they could listen to somebody talk about the city's history, specifically the 200 blocks history, which is fascinating. And they had hoped that some performers that had performed at the Blue Plate Special, which is, right across the street, would cross over in the afternoon and maybe jam a little bit, and people could enjoy it.
And
that's what we hope this will do. And I do believe it will.
So the piece, I think, is about a $500,000 contract for the piece itself. Once you add in the landscaping plan, which I know there's a whole complementary landscaping going along with this and so forth, this is about a little over $1 million project total. And the city, of course, has been setting aside money on a regular basis for public art over many years, which is kind of how that money got built up. But anytime there's a significant expenditure of public funds for art in any capacity, really, and you're very familiar with this, there's always some pushback. There's always people who say, why are you spending $1 million on this art in this park when we have homeless people, when we have, any number of other needs in the community? Isn't this just kind of like a nice thing to have, but not a necessary thing to have, and we should take care of our other needs first? So I know you hear that objection a lot. What's your response to it?
I think that's a perfect response for a city who that's dead boring. Really. I mean, if you have a garden and all you're doing in that garden is keeping back the weeds and spending all your energy in pulling weeds and making sure that there's nothing growing, in the dirt, because, it might be pretty if you plant it. Well, it won't have weeds, but it'll be a pile of dirt. And in a city, that's kind of like a pile of cement and concrete. We do want to reach out to our homeless people, and we are reaching out to homeless people, and we have fabulous nonprofits in the city doing everything that they can. And yet, that's not all there is to life. You want a city that's exciting. You want it to be inviting. You want people who are young and looking forward to a career to want to move here and think to themselves during the weekend, I've got a fun place to go. I've got an interesting city to live in. I've got a forward-looking city to live in, a city that doesn't just look behind it all the time, because it ain't going that direction. It's going forward. And this is what that park is all about. It's the cool factor that we too often in my beloved city say, we just don't have the money for cool. But we do, and we are. And it will be an investment that pays off. It'll pay off in civic pride. It'll pay off in cleanliness, because people who love a space, who invest in a space, keep that space clean, and they want to use it. And more traffic also means less crime. So I think it's that, not that you ignore all of our needs, but that's not all that you focus on. You have to plant some flowers, dang it.
Well, specifically with this piece, it's obviously with just about any work of art, there are people who love it, the conceptual designs that we've seen, and there are people who hate it, and that's to be expected. But there are also some other objections that have been raised. There's the Sierra Club is objecting to the removal of some of the trees that are in the park.
Well, let me just say this. The Sierra Club,
Okay,
the
we'll
Sierra
take these.
Club, they don't give two shits about those trees. If they did, they would have said something when the Hatcher Hill project was on the slate to cut down 5 trees 20 feet away. The problem is that a couple of people who, I'm sorry, had the opportunity to participate in this project and decided they had other things to do while the community was coming together and selecting it. They were too busy to do it. And now that the community has selected something, they feel like they can swoop in and save the community from its poor, taste. Well, excuse me. Who do you think you are? It makes me mad. There are 5 trees, I am sorry to say, that will have to be taken down. One is an elm, which is in very poor shape and would need to come down anyway. It's going to fall and hurt somebody. The other 4 are maples. And those maples, over time, they will eventually be in conflict with the trees we are saving. You know what I'm saying? And then we're adding actually more trees. And let's face it, it's like they were saying, the trees in Market Square all of a sudden got big. Boys, we live in a temperate rainforest here. Trees get big and they get big quick. We have an arborist. The arborist plans for the long term, and trees are taken down and trees are planted so that in the long term, we have the canopy that's going to serve all of us.
And I think there's going to be a net gain of, 9 trees, because 5 are coming down, and
yes, 5 are coming down, 12 are being preserved, and 9 are being added. 9. And in another 10 years, they'll be huge and we will love them.
One other, the only one other objection that people have raised is, or not necessarily objection, is a concern that that the purpose of Cradle of Country Music Park is to honor Knoxville's musical heritage, and that this project does not do that. And I know that there are some measures that are going to be taken to preserve that. The name's going to stay the same. So how will the Knoxville's musical heritage be commemorated in the park?
We're lucky that there were many people when the News Sentinel decided that it was going to commemorate the birth of country music here. They sponsored plaques with many, and I'm not talking about a handful. I'm talking about many plaques with the names of those musical pioneers that had something to do with Knoxville. And our East Tennessee Historical Society has been holding on to those for years for us, preserving them, protecting them, storing them, and they will be incorporated around the site. And, is this sculpture, as I said before, is it a 60-foot guitar? No. But not every instrument is a guitar. And, it's like, in Lubbock, Texas, when they commemorate Buddy Holly, they didn't put a guitar there either. They put a great big pair of glasses. We wanted something that responded to the purposes that the public said they wanted for that park. There will be many, many memories of the people who lived here and who created and forged a path of American music. And in addition to remembering those people, the living will be able to actually be in that space and enjoy it. Because life is for the living, and so is that park.
Well, so this is, I think, by far the largest single public art piece that Knoxville has undertaken. What's next? What else is on the drawing board out there for other, major sites or things that you and the Public Arts Committee are working on?
Well, public art was a relatively new thing. Mayor, is his name Knox White, told me a
He's
few
from,
years ago.
Greenville, South Carolina.
Yes. He said, Miss Zenni, be careful. Once you start doing public art, everybody will want some. And he was right. We started doing murals, and now look at Knoxville. We're covered with murals because people love them. And it's the same with public art. We are the committee is particularly interested in Dr. William Powell Park in East Knoxville. It's in the center of a lovely neighborhood, and the East Tennessee Community Design Center has already gotten permission to help us meet with that community and that neighborhood and get their input and figure out what they need. I think the Park and Rec Department has already set aside some money to do some improvements to that park. So we're really excited about that. And that's the next thing. Will it be $500,000? No, but remember, the Public Art Committee, they handled their money far better than Liza Zenni ever does. They stuck back money year after year after year, waiting to make this big investment. And so I think it'll be a while before, another site that is quite as central and iconic, 14,000 cars a day going by. It'll be a while before another site like that raises up and presents itself.
Yeah, that's one thing that as I've looked into this and talked to people about it, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of public art that you would consider that. I think we have the Alex Haley statue in East Knoxville. There's the sinking rowboat on Gay Street, the torchbearer at UT, but there doesn't seem to be, and there are a lot of temporary sculptures that Dogwood Arts has puts on in a rotating basis. But as far as permanent, long-term public art, it seems like there aren't very many examples around.
Well, I think that's in one way a good thing. You don't want public art every time you turn around, ditch in the face and shock you. But when you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, I love that. A lot of people love the painted stairs that are on Cumberland as you drive east into the city over there on the right. A lot of people love the metal relief that's right beside the Tennessee Theater and NAMA up there. A lot of people love the sculpture that is in front of the State Street Garage. The mural that's coming down around the retaining wall to Fall Landing. So it's there. The Public Art Committee created it, installed it. My favorite piece is that fabulous mural of all of Knoxville faces that's on the east side of the Market Square Garage in Market Square. I love that thing. And so, no, they don't jump out at you, but they do over time, especially make you feel like, yeah, that's us.
Well,
That's
and I
us.
think, an example of people becoming attached to public art is the mural in the old city of, speaking of country music history, of Knoxville music history, that was painted over by the property owner a few years back. And there was such a public outcry that the property owner turned around and hired the original artist who had done that to come back and redo it and
in East Tennessee, Jesse, we said he came to Jesus.
Right, exactly. But that showed that people were very attached to seeing that. So, well, I think, Scott, unless you have anything else, we should probably wrap this up.
I am good, Liza. Thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to talking with you again in the future about other exciting art projects coming down the pike.
Thanks. I appreciate all the good work you boys do.
Thanks a lot.
And as Jesse mentioned before the interview segment, Liza is pretty outspoken on the arts. She's very passionate about it, as came across. One thing that I will say, we by the format we interviewed her. We didn't interview anybody else for this. We did for the story that I worked on. And one thing I'll say is I spoke to the people at the Sierra Club that Liza's colorful description of their attitude toward this project. I found the Sierra Club to be very genuine in their concern about the trees that are in Cradle of Country Music Park. I think one of the things that this shows is the passion that people have for the issues they care about. I was speaking with someone after the story ran, but obviously before this interview ran, about how passionate Liza is and how passionate the Sierra Club and their the people who agree with them are, and they are. And it's one of the great things about being a journalist and being able to cover things like this is we're able to cover these people who are so passionate about the things they care about. And this is one of those cases where you've got people who are passionate about two different things that basically can't coexist in the exact same place. So we'll see how that works out. And moving forward, and speaking of city issues, coming up this week, City Council is going to be meeting. One of the issues they're going to be taking up is mental health. And there is a proposal that Helen Ross McNabb take over the management of a building at the St. Mary's campus in North Knoxville that the city has taken over and is going to be renovating, or is in the process of renovating many of the spaces. There was a lot of concern in the North Knoxville community about the lack of a emergency room once Tenova left the hospital and the hospital campus, and then and also there's been a lot of concern about mental health services in the community. One of the buildings on the campus is going to be reserved for both of those. The city, the county, and the state have come together, and there will be a emergency health clinic in this building. It's on Woodland Avenue, and there will also be a behavioral health clinic. And Helen Ross McNabb is going to be leasing the building for $1 a year for 10 years and committing to spending $4 million to build it out and convert it into this dual clinic. And that money comes from the state of Tennessee. So City Council is going to be voting on that. I think that we've had Ben Harrington from the Mental Health Association on the show, and it's been a big issue, and that's going to be a concrete step moving forward, that there will be more mental health services for people who need it in the community. And with that, Jesse, what do you have looking forward to?
Well, this is a national issue, but one that we're going to be localizing with a story next week. Of course, everybody's anticipating the forthcoming Supreme Court ruling in the Dobbs case, which, based on the leaked opinion that came out in February, we all assume now is probably going to fundamentally alter the existing legality, the constitutional protection for abortion. And, what that's going to mean in a lot of states, including Tennessee, that have already passed laws set to take effect if and when the Roe versus Wade opinion is overturned, is that abortion will probably become illegal and criminalized at a felony level in the state of Tennessee probably very soon. I sat down and talked to Corin Ravetti, who's co-director of the Knoxville Center for Reproductive Health, currently the only operating abortion clinic in Knoxville, kind of about what their plans are if and more likely when that happens, what it's going to mean here, and then kind of what she anticipates going forward from that. Because, whatever that decision ultimately says, I don't think anyone anticipates that that's going to be the end of this issue. It will become illegal in Tennessee, but that doesn't mean that the state legislature can't come back the next year. And, other states, for example, have proposed laws to not just make abortion illegal in their own states, but to try to penalize people who say go out of state to have an abortion someplace where it is legal, those kinds of proposals. So anyway, I'm going to have a forthcoming story on that, which will be available at CompassKnox.com for all of our subscribers. And I guess with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. It's Friday afternoon here in Santa Fe, and there's probably someplace I can get a margarita.
Well, you didn't have to go that far for a margarita. I can probably find one here in Knoxville too. So
they taste better here. It's the altitude.
There you go. That's fine. Maybe I'll make a pitcher up and throw it in a thermos and hike up to Mount LeConte and get some altitude there and toast you from Myrtle's Point. How's that?
All right, sounds good. Well, have a good weekend, and we'll see you all back here next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.